My name's Aliza. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm also a local business owner, building a startup to help musicians manage themselves. It's called Musicians Base, and it's a software company. And I helped start this local chapter of Balance Breakfast a couple of years ago. We had a very active group for a while, and then I got pretty involved in some other things, so some other people took it over. Then it dispersed, they moved. So then, Malaku and I, we decided to kick it back up again this year. So this is actually our first meeting, official meeting in probably a year. We had a holiday party in December, which was pretty cool. A couple of you were there. And that was really fun. We had a jam session. And so I was thinking what we could do today for the meeting. I'm sure some people are going to trickle in. Oh, I thought that was like a preacher. What I'd like to do is just have everybody go around and introduce themselves, just say who you are and what you do in the music industry, and maybe how you found out about this. It's probably through Facebook, but we're trying to figure out the best ways to reach people. And I'll introduce our guest speaker, and we'll go deep on the AB5 bill and what we can do about it, and questions that some of you may have. Mark can help clarify those questions since he's pretty deep in it. And there's a couple of other things that I can share with you as we go through our conversation that I think would be pretty interesting and important to follow up on. So anyway, I want to introduce Malaku, who is the proprietor of Mowbray Studio. The proprietor.
I'm the proprietor. So my name's Malaku. Kind of jack of all trades in music. Run the recording studio there. Artist, songwriter, producer. What else? I think that's pretty much the main thing. But I mean, I pretty much do everything. So.
So there's a recording studio here.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to take a tour, just take off your shoes and I'll show you around.
Cool.
My name's Steve LeBoux. I play drums, vocals, songwriter, recording engineer. Back in 20 years ago when I was using a VS1680 Roland, I need to upgrade my system now. Just jamming with. I used to be more, I guess you'd say professional. I used to open up for big name bands at the Keystone Palo Alto back right after high school, and doing pretty good. The opening up for Ronnie Montrose and all the guitar heroes that came to town. We would do it every month, which was a good time. And the band broke up just before our album was coming out. So since then, I've just been jamming with friends. Nothing as serious as I'd like it to be, and playing other people's music instead of my own. I do write music, and I'd like to do more of that myself and work on that.
Cool. How'd you find out about the meeting?
It was Facebook.
Right on.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to make this look at everybody, so it has to look at me too. So I'm Tom Padula. I do a lot of different kinds of music, both modern, Celtic, folk, bluegrass, as well as historic. I teach an early music choir, which I've been doing for 20 years. Professionally, I write music and audio software. Run a small company with my wife as the CEO because she has the business smarts. And that is pretty much my connection with the music industry. I was at DigiDesign way back in the early days of Pro Tools and TDM. Did 3D audio for Silicon Graphics. I was at Apple doing iMovie, Soundtrack Pro, the iPad, and some stuff for Final Cut. So since then, about 10 years ago, left Silicon Valley, stopped commuting over the hill, so run my own gig now.
Nice.
Well, my name is Greg Suliotes. I record and perform under the name Destiny's Son. I'm a vocalist. I do play some synth. I was the synth player for Four Pieces. Educational background, Juris Doctor, Bachelor of Science Business Administration. Used to work in the high-tech industry for Philips and Sony and Iridex. Just here to help. Make some connections.
Sweet. Thanks, Greg.
I like music. I sing in his early music choir, which is where we met, and whatever he invents, I either say, "Oh God, no," or I say, "Okay, how do you give that to everybody?" That's cool.
Awesome. Hi. And your name?
Oh, names. Yeah, I found this. My name's Autumn.
It's too early.
Yeah. I am not a morning person. This is so early in the morning. And Aliza introduced us to this group.
Thank you for coming.
I am Chas Crowder, originally from Gadsden, Alabama. My mother is was John Lee Hooker's piano player, so I literally grew up in a studio on the back of tour buses, the back of venues. I've been playing music professionally for 25 years for a living. I've lived in Manhattan, New York, Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, Birmingham, Oklahoma City, and I settled here 6 years ago. I founded Santa Cruz Musicians Only. We have 2,700 local members. By the way, I'm happy to make you an admin to do official invites to the group.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you.
I'm currently, I teach lessons. I work for Boulders Creek Sound Recording Studio with Barry Tanner. I book at Joe's. I'm the new booking agent of The Reef in Pono, and I've also, over the past few years, subcontracted with the Catalyst and numerous other clubs. And I play music 5 nights a week. And I have a 4-year-old, so I don't sleep a lot.
Oh my.
So, yeah, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. This is a great thing.
Totally. Thanks for coming.
This is Zach Gentry, singer-songwriter, mostly. I'm an amateur event organizer. I put on some, good-sized little benefit shows and stuff. And an amateur recording engineer, setting up my own little crappy studio. But mostly I just focus on songwriting, personal growth, reaching people, and just practice.
Cool. Thanks, Zach.
Hey y'all, I'm Taylor. I sing, I songwrite, and I'm kind of like a baby in this whole world, music realm wise. And I'm just trying to look to level up basically. All this Capricorn, I don't know if y'all know, but like it's like 5 or 6 planets in Capricorn, so everybody's like going after their passions. So anyways, I heard about this through Facebook and just trying to gain some confidence and some knowledge in this business and looking to outreach and meet people and yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're all trying to level up.
Yeah. Well, Mark Pearson.
Right on. So I'm Mark Pearson. I've been an entertainment lawyer for 15, 17 years. Prior to that, I spent 10 years as a television sports journalist. I bounced around a bunch of stations on the West Coast. The last place I was at was in Sacramento, and I was like a sports anchor guy. But for the past years, I've been working pretty much exclusively with people that are working on entertainment content, either on the talent side or the business side. So I work with some independent filmmakers, lots of different musicians, recording studios, production studios, artists, and the like. And I love what I do. It's incredibly rewarding and fun and challenging, but it's a great job. It's perfect for me, and so I'm very happy to be here. I'm also Balanced Breakfast, like the main chapter's lawyer, so if any of you know Stefan, who kind of founded Balanced Breakfast, I've worked with him for a number of years on different things, so I'm happy to be here. It's a beautiful day. Like really nice. Mm-hmm. We've had a very nice start to the year weather-wise.
Yeah.
The rest of the world, not so much, but weather-wise, we've had a nice start to the year. So it's something.
Totally. And thank you. I forgot to mention, just to give a little background on Balanced Breakfast. So it's a national music industry meetup group, and this is the local chapter here in Santa Cruz. And Stefan Aronson started it. how many years ago?
It's been a while.
It's been quite a few years, but it started in San Francisco, and it now has chapters all over the world. There's about 20,000 members worldwide.
A lot, right?
It's really grown. They do a huge summit up in San Francisco every year, the National Summit, where people fly in, and there's panels. That's happening in February.
It's coming up in February.
Yeah, I'm going to actually be on a panel. Are you going to be on
I'm
a
on a
panel?
panel as well, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be talking about music tech, because that's my specialty, and there's entertainment law and stuff. But there's all kinds of cool panels to educate people about the industry, so you guys might want to check that out. It's like, I don't know, I think it's like $20 or $30 to go for
Yeah,
the day.
so it's really fun. The last day, this will be the third year.
Yeah.
Really good turnout. Super cool venue that they have at that Piano Fight.
Yeah.
If any of you are from San Francisco and go way back, Piano Fight used to be Original Joe's, and then it burned down. And then now it's Piano Fight. They moved Original Joe's into North Beach. Yeah, and I think I'm doing a panel. I work with a band called Combrio. Some of you may know Combrio. Their manager, Casey, and myself, and an accountant that I think might work with the band. We're all going to do like a panel on the team that you have if you have a band.
Nice.
I think that's the panel that we're doing.
Cool. And then also, you can apply to be part of the South by Southwest showcase. That, if you have a band that is like actively touring and stuff, this Balance Breakfast also hosts every year a series of showcases at South by. So that's something that you can find the link in the Facebook group. All right, down to business. So I know some of you have already read the article that Ari Herstand, he's an independent artist and an advocate for independent artists, but he put out an article last month that went viral that was basically informing people about this AB5 bill that is threatening the livelihoods of independent musicians, but not just independent musicians, but it's kind of changing the laws around who can be labeled an independent contractor. And it affects independent musicians because it puts us in a position where we have to either incorporate and become employers, or start doing things in a way where, there's a lot of questions about it, because there's laws, there's legality, and there's a question, is it going to be enforced? And it's kind of all over the place, and new information's coming out all the time. But the purpose of today, as you know, is to get some clarity on what is actually happening, what's the status, and what are our rights, and what can we do, and also clarifying any major questions about like ABC laws, the ABC test, and also just to give some updates on things that I've been learning as I've been staying on top of the news. So without further ado, Mark, I'd like to kind of ask you some questions to create context, and then if anybody has any questions, just chime in. It's an open conversation. Don't want it to be too formal, but want to make sure to cover a lot of ground for people who have questions that you might have already come with. So the first thing we want to know is, why does this bill exist, and why were musicians included in this bill?
Yeah. Okay, so this really goes to the heart of what's happening now in the economy, where we have technology companies who are basically have taken the position, and we're specifically talking about Uber and Lyft is where this really comes from. Took the position that we're just a tech company, and we're facilitating a transaction between drivers and riders, and that we really don't have any responsibility other than to facilitate that transaction. And so therefore created this dichotomy where the drivers were all independent contractors, and then you had the riders. And there were issues that were streaming from that, but the specific issue that the state is concerned with, of course, is money and taxes, right? And if you're paying your contractors independent, as an independent contractor, they have the ability to write off, you have the ability to write off and take deductions on your business expenses, and there's probably a portion of those people who are not contributing into the tax system. So the state of California decided, let's change the law, and let's make it so that people who are working in this scenario are considered employees. On the employee side, you have a whole bunch of contractors that are driving that don't have things like health benefits or paying into Social Security, and so there's some issues on the employment side as well. Workers' comp if something happens while they're on the job, and so there's the law also, or the state also looked at it as being a benefit to these people who were being considered contractors, and saying these are actually employees. They should be able to receive the type of benefits that other employees receive. So that's really where this law came from, is that nexus and that juxtaposition between the contractors and the technology companies in what we're calling the gig economy. So it's every Lyft and Uber and Postmates and the delivery services and everything else that fits in there. So there was a case that came down called Dynamex, which basically changed the law 2 years ago, but it didn't really affect anyone because they weren't enforcing it against everyone, and it was just a change to the law, meaning it set precedent if there was going to be a lawsuit. But with AB5, what they did is they actually codified the decision from Dynamex and said, now we are going to make this an actual law that everyone has to follow. What it essentially did is change the contractor law. This affects employers, okay? And it basically puts penalties on employers for not following the correct procedure and misclassifying employees as contractors. So this really is a law directed at penalizing employers or people who the law says should have been considered an employer. And so it basically took the old rules of contractors, which was really based on control of the contractor. So if you were an employer, the more control you had over the particular person you were engaging, the more likely they were an employee. So if you told them what to do, if you gave them business cards, if you did all their marketing, they were more likely an employee. To the extent that they did all the work themselves, they had autonomy, they were more likely going to be considered a contractor. The new test basically says, does this person perform a critical function to your job, to your business? If so, they're an employee. And I can read you exactly what the ABC test is now, so you can actually hear the specific language instead of it being summarized, but I saved it this morning, so I could read the exact. So it's a three-part test to determine whether or not someone is now a contractor or an employee. And the test is, are they free from control and direction of the hiring entity in the performance of their work? So I think for a lot of musicians, you would be able to argue if you were considered, let's say you were hiring a producer to produce your album, you would say maybe they meet that test, right? Because you're not telling the producer exactly how to do their job. And when. It's a collaborative thing where you mutually determine where you're going to meet, studio, and then you tell the producer, this is kind of what I'm going for, and you let them kind of do what they need to do. So maybe for musicians hiring a producer, it's still a contractor under the Part A. B, the person performs work that's outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. So you're a musician. Are we going to say that hiring a producer is within the normal course of your business? Maybe. It's really tough to determine, right? I mean, if what you're doing is putting out an album every year or 2 years, is that the normal course of your business? You see, so it starts to fall apart here in terms of where we're going to go. And the more things get gray, the more likely the state comes in and says, no, it's the way that's going to be beneficial to us taxation-wise, meaning you should be an employee. Okay? The third part of the test, Part C, says the person is customarily engaged in an independent established trade, occupation, or business. So that's me, a lawyer. Lawyers are generally independent from their clients and just hired to do a particular job. But I would even argue that the type of law that I practice, where there's clients of mine that I've had for years and years and years, and we talk on a weekly basis, and I'm fully engaged in their business and knowing, I would argue that I might not meet that test. However, along with the ABC test, they also adopted the rules from another case called Borello, which carved out very specific jobs that were not subject to this. And lawyers, accountants, doctors are in there. So I never have to worry about it, even if I met the criteria here.
Could you clarify one thing?
Sure.
The ABC test,
Yep.
is that A and B and C, or A or B or C?
You have to meet all three.
If you meet all three,
If you
then
meet all
you
three,
are an
that is a
employee?
contractor.
Then you have
could
to
be
meet all
You have to
three.
meet all three, and then you can consider that person a contractor.
Got it.
Yep.
So these are all, I've been confused. I've been reading about these for months, right?
Yeah.
But it's very confusing language because to say that someone's free from control or direction, well, as a musician, if you're playing music that's already been written or you have charts that you've written and you're presenting to a musician, technically you are directing them. If you're a musical director of your album, you're technically directing them. Customarily engaged in an independent business. I mean, being a musician is an independent business, but it's very murky.
It's
it
very
doesn't
murky.
make a lot of sense.
Right, especially for certain professions, like music, like if you're an actor in a film, right? If the production company is hiring you to do one work for them, and the production company is set up to do this, like, does it fit here? So just about every aspect of the entertainment industry is affected by this law, and specifically trying to fit in under the ABC test. But this Borello case basically carved out a whole bunch of different occupations that would not be subject to this, provided they meet some criteria, and it's kind of different for different professions. So, for instance, so doctors, lawyers, accountants are carved out no matter what they do. Then there's a carve out for writers, but the carve out is limited. You can only submit 35 written pieces to any particular publication. Otherwise, after the 35th, you're going to be considered an employee. There's also caps on the amount that you can get paid, right? So there's some nuance there. There's some nuance for cosmetologists. Cosmetologists, they have to set their own rates and book their own clients. So if you're a cosmetologist now and you rent a chair in a studio, right? Under the old test, you probably could be considered a contractor, but under the new test, if the studio where you're renting your chair books you out, okay, so they have a central website that you can book your clients on, and they take payment and then process it and then pay you out. Now you're an employee, okay? But if you book all your own clients, you have your own stripe on your card, and you're literally just renting a chair, then you would be carved out. So when you hear, and you'll probably hear if you study up on this or you read more about it, about the carve-outs for these professions and these professions, recognize that all of those carve-outs have some nuance and limitation to them, which is why it didn't happen for musicians and other people in the entertainment industry. And there's a lot of reasons why, but basically there was unions and larger established organizations like the RIAA that were arguing, and they couldn't come to a consensus. The problem with it, as you and I have discussed, is that there was no voice given to independent artists in that discussion. Really, the discussion was coming down from different musician unions and from the Songwriters Guild and from the RIAA, and they were the ones that were making the arguments in favor of the carve-out, and they just couldn't come to an agreement. They're going back to the drawing board now, and they're trying again to work out a carve-out for entertainment industry professionals, and so that's going on right now. So I know this is a lot, so questions?
So how does, for a venue or a festival hiring a band, it sounds like venue might be iffy depending on, like, if it's a coffee shop, well, they don't have to have a band, but if it's like the Catalyst,
Right.
that's the main thing they
Right.
do. And all these festivals, if you don't have any bands
You don't have a festival.
or anybody you
festival.
hired to,
Yep.
then, yeah.
It's a huge issue there, right? Especially when you're hiring an independent musician or band that maybe doesn't have a business entity, and we can talk about how that might change the dynamic if you have an actual business entity, a corporation or an LLC that you formed, right? But for a lot of festivals, you may have your headliner maybe set up as an LLC, but like all your opening acts or some of the acts that are playing at the smaller venues are going to just be independents working either as a partnership or a sole proprietor. In which case, yeah, this then comes into play, right? Does it meet the ABC test, right? It probably doesn't. And then the law is going to consider that to be an employee, and it's like really an uncomfortable thing because venues are not in a position to deal with that. And so let's stop here for a second and say, what is the ramifications? Okay, so again, this law is targeted at the person that should be or is considered the employee, okay? And what the law says is that if you misclassify your contractor, and they should have been an employee, you have to pay penalties and you have to pay back taxes, specifically penalties into workers' comp, and then there are taxes into workers' comp and penalties associated there, and also withholding. And how the law works is essentially if everybody here has worked a W-2 job for an employer where you get your withholdings on your paycheck, right? Generally, the employer pays 7.5% employment tax, and the employee pays 7.5% employment tax. Okay, and the state gets 15% total. 7.5 from the employer, 7.5 from the employee. If the employer makes an error here and misclassifies, the state's going to go after the employer, or the person that should be considered an employer, for the full 15. So nowhere in here does the employee get punished. So if all you are is someone who is on the employee side, there really isn't an issue for you here. The other thing to keep in mind also that I think has jumped up, and this is really critical, if you're, say, a band and you hired a producer and you hired him as a contractor, and for some crazy reason the state decided to come after you and say that producer should have been an employee, and so we're now going to come after you for withholding tax and for workers' comp and for the penalties under this law. This does not affect the agreement over the rights in the work that was created between the two parties. Okay, this is just an issue between the employer and the state. So it doesn't invalidate the fact that the producer signed work for hire language giving the rights in the work that they did to the musicians. Or it doesn't invalidate the amount that they were paid as being good and valuable compensation. It just is a penalty or an issue as between the employer and the state. So a lot of people have worried, like, oh, does this mean that any contract that I entered into, like, it's invalid and now all the people I work with own the rights to what they created? No. It doesn't affect that part of your agreement. It only affects the language or it only affects the relationship between the employer and the state as far as taxes go. That having been said, I've started building into independent contractor agreements a clause that says to the extent that the employer's ever considered, or the contractor's ever considered an employee, we recognize that none of the terms of this agreement are affected except as required by the law. Just so that we're all clear on that, so nobody decides to later come forward and try to say, oh, well, since the state said it's not the right agreement for tax purposes, I'm going to claim that it wasn't the right agreement and invalidate and come after you for more money or something like that. So keep in mind that it's really just an issue between the employer and the state, not between the employer and the employee in terms of the rights.
Anybody got any questions before I ask if you had?
Yes. So, basically in the contract, from what I believe I understood, was you put an exemption in the contract saying that you are not an employee.
Yeah, so just about every contract that you might sign right now with someone who is considered a contractor is going to have and this goes back to when they created the old test. There's going to be a section in every agreement that says independent contractor status. They say, as between the two of us, we recognize you're an independent contractor. You're not entitled to any employment benefits that I give my employees, and you have to pay your own taxes. Now we're just going to add a second sentence that says, to the extent that the law classifies you as an employee, none of the rights discussed in this agreement will be affected. They wouldn't be anyhow, but just to make sure that there's no ambiguity in the relationship, I've started putting that into independent contract agreements.
Smart.
Is that a standard? Is that a standard form, or is that something you came up with?
No, it's all nothing standard anymore.
Because I'd love to get a copy of that.
Yeah, nothing standard anymore. And you're gonna want to go through your agreements. You probably, anybody here who works with agreements that they utilize with anybody that comes through probably should have the agreements looked at by a lawyer at least once a year, just to go over changes. And just to make sure that there's nothing in there that hasn't been affected by the law, or some precedent that's come down, or some, all of us lawyers talk to each other, and we are always coming up with new ways of wording things so that there isn't a problem. By example, back in in 25, 30 years ago, nobody thought to put in language, which you're going to see in all agreements now, about in the format now or in the future invented. What happened is, lots and lots of TV shows that you may have watched growing up, you notice they're not out on DVD, they're not being streamed. Why? It's music rights. because the license that they had was for broadcast on television. And so when they wanted to go to DVD, they did not have those rights in there. So now the language in all contracts that you license says in any format now known or in the future invented, so that those rights are grandfathered in and they go forward. And so there's certain movies, like one movie that I remember I really enjoyed watching as when I was a kid, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It wasn't until the 25th anniversary of the movie that they finally got the rights to the last song that was in the original theatrical release. It was a Tom Petty song, and they finally got that and put it in there. TV show that I remember watching growing up, Beverly Hills 90210. All the music in Beverly Hills 90210 was Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana. When that went to come out on DVD, those bands said, hell no, not a chance. And so they originally tried to put it out with like some sound-alike stuff, and it was really like alarmingly uncomfortable listening to it. It was like people trying to sound like grunge, and it was really bad, and so they actually kind of pulled those. So that's an example though of something that over time you want to make sure your contracts are looked at so that you don't have some older language that might not cover you. So always a good idea to have your contracts looked at least once a year, once every other year, depending on what you're doing.
Cool.
As a sidebar.
So,
yes, question.
Oh, sorry.
So, again, on what makes you, business entities, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, and you've said just now, you mentioned corporations and LLCs.
Yep.
Why not GPs and SPs, general proprietors and sole proprietors? They still have an EIN, so they still pay employee taxes.
Yeah, because they're associated with an individual. And so what are we talking about? Under that Borello case where they had the carve-outs, one of the carve-outs is a business-to-business transaction, okay? So if you own a business that is a booking agency that's set up as an LLC, and you hire a band that's set up as an LLC, that's a business-to-business transaction. You don't have to worry about any of this. This independent contractor thing doesn't come into play at all because it's a business-to-business transaction. However, there are some nuances to that in terms of the law may look at how many employees does that business that you're contracting with have, or how many members of the LLC. And if it's a sole or single member disregarded entity, they may then apply the ABC test.
Which is crazy.
So it's crazy, right?
Because you're still paying all those corporate taxes.
So that's why, because a general partnership or a sole proprietorship in and of itself is just individuals. And since the law actually says we may look at your corporation to see, is it a single shareholder corporation? Is it a single member LLC? We're going to take a look at it. We might apply the ABC test. We're not sure. And so, it gets a little muddy. But in general, you're going to get the carve out under Borello. And I think, so that's what's there. But yes, one of the strategies that people are now taking, especially if it's a band and they know that they're going to be doing a record cycle and they just don't want to have to be concerned, is they're asking the producer, are you set up as a business entity? And then they want everyone that they're working with to be set up that way. But what does this mean? This means that you have to file paperwork with the state of California to set yourself up as a corporation or an LLC. There are advantages one way or the other depending upon what you're going to do. Most of the things that you are concerned with there are on the tax side, and so you want to talk to an accountant before setting up either a corporation or an LLC. Legally, they both do the same thing, but there might be tax advantages one way or the other for you depending on what your business is. Once you have that business entity in place, that actually stands as a person, and it's the thing that does business, and then you are just a member or a spokesperson for that entity. The biggest problem with setting up an entity is that you have to do it correctly in order for it to be effective, meaning you have to have an operating agreement or bylaws and do meeting minutes, which means generally, unless you have experience doing that, you've got to come to someone like me and pay me to do that for you. You also have to pay $800 a year to the state of California, including in the first year that you file. So I spent this past few days doing a lot of filing of business entity formation documents, because if somebody comes to me in November and says, I want to become an LLC, I say, can we wait until January? Otherwise, you've got to pay $800 in November and then $800 again in January for the next year, because California rips people off like that. It's the only state that does the first year tax in that way. So I spend a lot of time in January getting all these corporations set up and LLCs set up for people that didn't need to do it in quarter 4 of 2019 and can wait. But that's the biggest hurdle, is the cost of setup and then the annual fee of $800 that you've got to pay. Yes.
I had a quick question here. So the way things stand now, a lot of people have to consider, okay, do I want to be a corporation or an LLC? If they decide to become a corporation, wouldn't there be issues with duplicate taxation? I mean, if the corporation would get taxed and then whatever income would flow to the musicians, that would be subject to tax too.
So there's generally, with an LLC or a corporation, you can set it up for flow-through taxation, so the corporation or the LLC doesn't pay tax. It just flows through to the individual members. I think one of the biggest hurdles to forming an LLC, other than the formation costs, is that if you're in a band and you have a partnership agreement, it's very easy for someone to leave the band. Okay, it wasn't working out, or we vote you out, or whatever, and then you leave, and then you kind of figure out what they're entitled to. If you all are members of an LLC, you actually have to go through some formalities in order for someone to leave an LLC. Because they are now tied to that LLC. There are tax issues that have come up and liability issues there, and so it's not as easy as I'm not in the band anymore and I'm walking away because I'm mad, and then by default, if you do that, you've left the partnership. In an LLC, you're still a member of the LLC until you sign paperwork, and so that's where I've had some issues with bands that were set up as an LLC, and then there's an acrimonious split from a member, and they're like, I'm not signing anything, and it's like, it's in your best interest to sign, otherwise you're still attached, you still have tax liability, but you know how things can get.
Which is why your agreement should have things written into it,
and a partnership agreement, right? A partnership agreement is really easy for that. If you walk away and you break up, you're out, and we'll send you 25% because you're a 1/4 member of the band, of whatever the band's assets are, and you'll continue to get paid. But with an LLC, you can't just do that. You can't take away someone's membership in an LLC unless they affirmatively sign the document saying that, and so it becomes a little bit tricky.
It's like a divorce.
It's like a divorce, right? As a partnership, it's like a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend. With an LLC, it's a divorce. That's exactly a great analogy.
A lot more entailed. And then another issue to think about when you become an LLC or a corporation and you become an employee of your entity, you actually do have to pay payroll, taxes. You have to have somebody that's making sure that you're following all the legalities of when to file taxes, and also you have to file corporate taxes instead of personal taxes. So if you're like maybe okay, so like I'm the sole proprietor as an independent artist, I'm a singer-songwriter, so I do most of my shows by myself, and then I pay everybody as independent contractors, right? So I don't pay payroll, but now under this law, it just becomes a thing where I would have to become an employer, right, to pay out a guitarist or drummer or whatever, but then on top of that, the payroll taxes that you have to pay, and then pay. So so I do my own taxes, right? So it's like I do it through like Easy File. I do it myself. I do my Schedule C. But if you're a corporation or an LLC and you have to do it, a corporate tax filing, it's much more intricate, and it requires actually hiring somebody. In my case, who knows how to file, which costs a lot more money.
And it costs more. That's right. It
costs like $2,500.
Again, depending on how you set up the corporation and LLCs in general, flow through. So the entity itself doesn't pay tax, but it has to prepare a filing. And essentially what you're doing, if you are a member of an LLC, when you prepare your filing, is you're creating what's called a K-1 statement, or you're creating probably a K-1 statement as a corporation as well, and it is essentially the same thing as a 1099 or a W-2, and you're issuing it to yourself, and that's what you use to prepare your personal income taxes. But you've got to prepare that at your entity level. And so it can be super costly depending on how many members you have, what kind of income you brought in. The flip side is that you have tax deductions and write-offs that you might not have. Also, with payroll, there can be advantages to setting yourself up in payroll. The problem we have in this dynamic, though, is that no payroll company wants to take on, I hired someone for one day to work 2 hours.
Yeah.
There's no payroll companies that are set up to do that. So it's literally almost impossible to follow the rules because there's no company out there that wants to take that on. If you're doing a regular paycheck to someone, even if it's a couple hours a week or something, that's one thing. But if it's, I'm going to do this once and I might not hire that person again. I got to get a substitute bass player. The payroll company's like, Or they're going to charge you so much money to do it, it becomes like, I guess we're doing this show without a bass player. Yeah, that's really the problem, because there are some advantages to setting up yourself as like an S corp and running yourself through payroll. There are some tax loopholes there that can be very advantageous to you, and you also are now in a position where you can get cheaper insurance, including healthcare insurance, if you do it like that. But it doesn't work in this context where you're hiring someone once and too small. The whole thing falls apart. So it's a total disaster what they've created, and this gets back to, I think, the underlying context, and we'll get into a little bit about enforcement and what's really going to happen. But I think the main thing here is to recognize, because now we're going to talk about how none of this is really going to affect you guys. but this is a terrible law to have on the books, right. And so it really is the time to reach out and be active on expressing yourself to lawmakers to get them to change, because they are in session now to make changes. There's going to be lawsuits that were immediately filed when we hit January 1st to dispute the legitimacy of this law, and now we're going to go through some changes, and it really is in everyone's interest to speak up now, because now is when you have the opportunity for the collective voice and you have people listening. If you don't speak up now and then we leave it on the books and nothing happens and never enforced, okay, fine, but then what happens one day when the state does decide to enforce the law? This happened to us in 2008. There was a whole bunch of different independent contractor, the old independent contractor rules. In 2008, the state went around and went to all these, graphic design firms and places that hired independent contractors and said, prove that these people are independent contractors. Well, guess what? Maybe the company could prove it. And they had all the paperwork and they had all the documentation that they met the rule. But now, because of the way the law was written, they have to spend money to defend themselves, because they didn't fight it in the first stages when they could knock it out, so they would never have to try to defend themselves. And what happens is we go through cycles. And in 2008, the state had no money. So the state was going, where can we go and pinch people and try to squeeze money out of people? Oh, let's go after these small businesses that hire contractors and make them prove that those are contractors. And what we will do is the due process is quite different in here. They send you a notice saying you're in violation of the law, you're penalized this much, prove us wrong. It's not a, hey, we think you're in violation of the law, let's discuss it. It's, here's your penalty, now go to a hearing and try to say that it's not this. And so now's the time when you don't have to take on the issue one by one by one if you get flagged or targeted. Now's the time when you can have the collective voice to say, okay, let's make this change, carve us out, make this never apply to us in the first place. And so that's why it's really important to step up and make your voice heard, because this is not going to be enforced against anybody right now. That's not what the law is intended. It's going after Uber and Lyft. It's not looking at you. There's no money in it right now for the state. The state's flush. There's no money in trying to find $50, $100 from people to penalize in the music and entertainment industries. But the law's on the books, and one day we could hit a 2008 recession again, or we could get somebody in Sacramento that takes a different position. Let's enforce everything, and now all of a sudden you have to take this on as an individual business, not as a collective voice. And so that's really why it's kind of imperative that everybody, do something, even if it's as little as signing an online petition.
Yeah, so speaking of online petitions, so there is a really great petition that's circulating that's got almost 20,000 signatures now. I put together a website that's like an info center for educating people about this. You can access the petition on that website. It's at bit.ly/CA Musicians. The full URL is Stand With California Musicians or camusicians.com. And there's a lot of resources up there, but mainly it just talks about what this law is and just a couple of action items. But the other cool thing is that there are some social media posts that we can do. If you go to that website right now, this could be like a fun little exercise for what we could do in this very moment to take action. But at standwithcaliforniamusicians.com, standwithcamusicians.com, there are little like images that you could share to Instagram or Twitter. So I made these. It's so easy. All you got to do is like click on it, just hold it down, and then you get share image, and then you can like open your Twitter, and if you use Twitter, and just send it to someone, boom, or tweet it. Same thing with Instagram, and I've sized these for all of the different social media things, like an Instagram story that you can then share to Facebook, and then also Twitter posts, and you can tweet it to Lorena Gonzalez, who is the assemblywoman who wrote this law. She's kind of a piece of work. I say that with all due respect. She does do some really great work, but in this case, she seems to be more representing the unions than she is people who don't really want to be part of unions. So it's kind of an enforcement that's happening that just seems a lot more heavy-handed without having a real understanding of how the industry works. She makes a lot of blanket statements about how, musicians don't get paid. They don't. I don't know. She makes a lot of blanket statements that people are like, really? That doesn't actually refer to me at all, but you're kind of saying that that's me. So, it's kind of weird, but you could tweet to her and say, we want an exemption. So another thing to keep in mind is that the union was very involved with the arguments that were happening. That is the reason why they didn't come to an agreement about language. And so these posts are very specific for non-union musicians, because nobody who is outside the union or outside the RIAA or labels, independent labels that were also at the table with A2IM were included in that conversation. So it's specific to non-union musicians. If you are a member of the union, or if you want to be a member of the union, it's a little bit different because you then have representatives, but at the same time, it just doesn't work the same way if you're in the union.
It's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you'll hear from legislators when you hear them speaking is, don't worry, it doesn't apply to you. And I'm about to tell you that. Same thing. But it's still bad to have this on the books. We want to have that carve out, because even though it doesn't apply today, and even though they're saying, oh, you guys it wouldn't affect you, don't worry about it, it's not targeted to you, it's still there. And we don't like having things that are there. There's lots of laws on the books right now that are there, and I don't want to scare anybody, that if you knew that they were there, you'd be, oh my God, but they don't get enforced. But it's bad that they're there in the first place. And when you have an opportunity like right now to say, wait a minute, let's correct this now at the beginning, then you got to take advantage of that. It's really critical, because even if nothing comes from it, it's important to take the steps to make it so that never happens. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add a small piece to that, which is that anything that, once it's on the books and they don't enforce it, say, for 10, 15 years, but they can go back 7 years worth of enforcement.
Retroactive enforcement.
Not penalized for this year. You've got, 7 years ago, plus 7 years of tax penalties
Right.
for that one. And so
Yeah.
it makes a much bigger difference
It makes a
when
big
they start
difference.
enforcing it.
That
than
is
you
absolutely
realize.
right.
If they ever
That's
turn it on,
absolutely
you totally understand.
Yeah, it could have been $100 7 years ago, but now at, $5,000 in penalties a year, plus on the penalties.
But it's even bad.
crazy.
It's even bad if you think about it. Let's say you had all your ducks in a row covering you, and every piece of information and legislation and decision and everything said independent contractor. There's nothing to stop the government from saying, we're going to enforce against you under this law, defend yourself. And now, instead of having collective voice, you're individually now having to pony up and come out of pocket to defend yourself, even though you might prevail, or you're likely to prevail. So if the law can't be targeted against you from the get-go, then you're not ever going to be in that position where you've got to defend yourself, even if we're going to ultimately prevail, and you wouldn't have to pay any penalties or have to worry about it. But you still had to come out of pocket or spend time and effort to defend yourself, right? And so that's why that's the other reason why it's really critical now, is because let's not give anybody the ammunition to come after us at all.
Right.
Whether we're, even if we're ultimately going to be correct in the way that we handled the situation, let's not let anybody make an issue of it in the first place. Yeah.
So there is some progress that's been made just in the last couple of weeks. So some of you are probably familiar with Ari's Take, the blog. It's a very popular blog that promotes independent music information and stuff like that. So Ari Herstand is the author of that blog. And he called out Lorena Gonzalez publicly about this, which created like a shitstorm on Twitter, which was kind of fun to watch. But she invited him to come speak with her in person, and he did that about 2 weeks ago. I've been following it pretty closely. And so he's been actually working with her office on language for a cleanup bill. And even though that hasn't been published yet or publicized, he told me that's in the works. So there is language happening that could potentially lead to a true exemption for musicians that are independent, but we still have to apply the pressure. So there is someone advocating who's on it, but again, we still need to apply the pressure. And so the more pressure we apply, the more they'll realize that they can't get away with also just double talk and yesing people, because that's another issue. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to help you guys. Yeah. Oh, we care. And now that you've brought this to our attention. But the truth is that some of the ways that I've witnessed this particular politician operate, it's doublespeak. So, you got to be very careful. You got to be very careful when trusting that people are actually going to follow through on what they say they're going to do.
I have a question.
Pressure.
I don't know if we covered this. Before, there was a certain number. It was $600 or $800 before you became a private contractor. What is? I was saying before that there was a number. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but there was a number of $600 or $800 before you even became a private contractor.
That's right.
Does that apply here?
No. What he's talking about is you don't have to 1099 or report someone's earnings to the government until they've made over $599. Yeah. So if you hire someone during the course of the year and you pay them a cumulative total of less than $599 or less, you don't have to report that to the government on a 1099. Okay, but that does not mean that you're exempt from this. This has to do with workers' comp. And so what this is saying is the minute the person started doing work for you, they should have been an employee, and you should have been paying into workers' comp.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Social Security and disability. And so that's really what it is. That's what this whole law is targeted at, okay, is two things. One, saying we've got all these people out there that are getting in car accidents, working for Lyft or whatnot, and they have no recourse because they're not in the system. And so the state's now having to deal with that on a state level, right? County hospitals and whatnot are having to deal with that because we have people that are employed as contractors not paying into the system. Also, the state's looking at it long term, going, we've got all these people that are working but not paying into Social Security. What's going to happen when they retire? Okay, so this is really an economic issue that cuts both ways. Okay, so this isn't necessary. The idea behind this law is not terrible. Okay, it's just that anytime you put a law out there, right? Anytime people try to make up a way to govern or control what's going on, it always has a deeper impact because things happen from that. And what happens is, musicians, actors, people that are working in talent are getting wrapped up in an issue that shouldn't be affecting them. We're not part of the problem that came from this, right? And so really we got wrapped up in this whole thing, and so now is opportunity to say, wait a minute, we should be treated like some of these other businesses and be carved out, and recognize there's a lot of businesses and a lot of independent contractors aside from just people in entertainment who are also vehemently opposed to this. Freelance writers are like freaking out because they can only write 35 articles a year, and then they have to be an employee. And so, freelance writers, and then all the people that work in, rent-a-chair businesses, because there's a carve-out for cosmetologists, but not for tattoo artists. Right? And so now, like, how do you deal with that? Where it's like, wait a minute, I'm an independent. I literally rent a chair from this place, and I book all my own clients, I set my own hours, and and now they have to employ me, and I have to follow their rules, and I have to wear a uniform, and like all this stuff, right? So this is, and that's why. This is not going to be enforced for quite a while. Okay, this is really a law that was intended to scare Uber and Lyft and other businesses that are going to be using that type of model into rethinking long-term strategy on how to make the people that are working for them employees. That's the intent of this law. This is challenged from day one. It's going to get litigated. It's not going to be enforceable right away. And the intent of the law being to go after larger companies, the state's not going to be looking to enforce against small businesses or independent people. And so there's not a real fear that you're going to get a notice, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay penalties or I'm getting called in. Now, it's really not a concern right now because this is going to go through some changes and some litigation before they're able to enforce it. But again, don't sit back and go, well, okay, if they're not going to enforce it, we should just, what do I care? It doesn't matter. Like, get it out of here.
So what do you recommend people do where we can prepare without having to cough up $2,500 to register and get on payroll and start, because that's kind of where it starts. It's like first you have to in lieu of actually following up on becoming an entity, what can we do to protect ourselves?
So obviously, aside from being vocal about changes to the law, what can you do to protect yourself? So when you craft your agreement, build in language that covers the ABC test. And even if later down the line you get challenged, you have an agreement that says, we all agree in this contract that I'm hiring you to do something that is special and that I can't do myself and that you have a unique skill to do and that you do for other people. So don't put anything in there that says you can't work for someone else while you're working for me. Okay? You're exclusive to me. Anytime you're going to go exclusive, boy, that's going to be, employee. So you're non-exclusive, you do this for lots of other people. You are doing something for me that's outside the scope of what I normally do. I'm hiring you to produce this album. I don't normally make albums, and so this is a unique scenario. So start thinking about language that's in your agreement that addresses the ABC test, not necessarily taking it on like a bull and stating it, but that you don't have anything in your agreement that goes against the ABC test. Okay, and then from there, it's really about perhaps taking some strategies of putting aside some money into an account to cover just in case something comes up, and making sure that you have a really good insurance plan. that will cover you in the event that you do get nailed with some type of an issue. And so getting good business and E&O insurance can be helpful as well. But really it's about, trying to get the law changed, and then just recognize that if you do get called out, and that you have the right to a hearing to challenge the, whatever you're being accused of not having paid. Where does enforcement usually stream from? In traditional cases, enforcement comes because you had hired someone as a contractor and then they were let go and they went down to the unemployment office and tried to collect unemployment. And the unemployment office says, we have no record of you being an employee. And they say, what do you mean? I worked for these guys for 10 years. And they didn't understand that you don't get unemployment if you're a contractor. And now a case is opened up and now you get investigated. Or your employee at the end of the year that you had as a contractor goes into H&R Block and the tax person goes, you owe $32,000 in tax. And they go, what are you talking about? You owe $32,000 in tax. You were paid $10.99 all year. And they call you up and they say, I thought I was making $100,000, but they just told me that I have to pay $32,000 in tax, so that means I only got paid $68,000. You ripped me off for $32,000. And you're like, what are you talking about? You always have to cover your own taxes. I didn't know that. I thought I was getting paid $100,000. You didn't tell me I was going to have to pay taxes. And then they raise an issue, and then that becomes a problem. Or somebody decides that they didn't like the fact that they were released from whatever they were doing, and they decide, well, you were paying me as a contractor at $10 an hour, but I work consistently 12-hour days, and the law says that you were supposed to pay me time and a half after 8 hours in the day, and you didn't do that, and so I'm going to go talk to an attorney, and the attorney's going to file a grievance with the state to open up a wage and hour claim. So usually it's not the state that is actively looking, it's the state taking action because somebody raised the issue with them. Okay, in smaller cases. Larger cases, when it's Lyft and Uber, that's because it's on the state's radar, because they're recognizing, wait a minute, there's this huge company that's taking these huge tax deductions, and where are their employees? And so there's a weirdness that they get triggered on the tax return for the corporation, and that's how the issue kind of got brought up. Is they're going, wait a minute, you're engaging thousands and thousands of people, and there's none of them are employees? How does that work? And that's what triggered this. But for small companies, it's usually triggered because somebody within the company raises an issue, which then flags it for the government agency, whether it's the Franchise Tax Board, the EED, or the Social Security or Workers' Comp.
So just by a show of hands,
I just had a question. If you're working through a contracting agency,
Yes.
okay, that should be legal because you're in employment at that agency. What about online? I mean, okay, Uber and Lyft is why this is created, the TaskRabbit and stuff.
Yep.
But what about some of these other ones? Are those still considered? Are you an employee of the site?
The website.
The website?
Yeah.
Or are you an employee because they filter all
This is a really good question. I got asked this, so even more germane to some of you that are in music. What about your talent agent? Is the talent agent considered under this rule? Would the talent agent be your employee, or would you be the talent agent's employee? Right? Who's hiring who? I look at it and I say, you're hiring the talent agent to do something for you, so you are employing your talent agent. But we're not sure. Is the law going to say the talent agent is employing the contractor and putting him on the job? So the way I look at with the talent, and I think if it's right in this, is the talent is employing the talent agent, and then the end client, whoever's engaging the talent, is employing the talent. And so how the heck do you fit that into the current model of the way that talent agencies and employment of models or something like that to do a photo shoot? How the heck is that going to work under anything like this? And I think it's the same thing that you're talking about in terms of who are we considering the employee in that situation when you're hiring through one of the online hire a graphic designer. Recognize though this. Keep in mind, if you're not hiring the person in California, they don't live in California, none of this applies. So if you are using an online, I'm going to hire a graphic designer, and you're in California, but they're in Georgia or Texas or in another country, none of this applies. You can consider them an independent contractor. California is the only state that has this law. So if they are in California, that might be a problem. What I suspect is going to happen if those technology companies that are providing that service, and I can't, what's the name of one of them?
I don't remember.
What's one of the ones?
Upwork?
Upwork, thank you. If you're on Upwork might come up if this law is effectively beginning to be enforced. Upwork might say you can't sign up to be a contractor if you live in the state of California.
Well, that's already starting to happen where a lot of people outside of California are not hiring California.
That's right.
And so I was just thinking too, it's like, environmental laws or environmental projects usually have to undergo like a severe environmental impact survey before they'll be approved. And there was no economic impact survey that was done about this at all. They just rammed this through.
They rammed this through as a gut punch to Lyft and Uber.
And Lyft and Uber are already fighting it, and they're refusing.
They're refusing
to go along with it, and they're probably going to win because they're billion-dollar companies. Right. And all of this is it just feels like a huge charade.
That's why to some extent, let's be concerned about it. Let's raise our voice. Let's be vocal. Let's get the law changed. But at the end of the day, I have a feeling the law is going to get invalidated. It's not going to ever be. Yeah. It's just going to go away. It's going to get litigated away. Because the drivers don't want it. Because the drivers want to be able to take tax deductions.
Right.
Really, the only people that want it is the state, because the state wants to make sure they get all of the money that they think they're entitled to into the state's entitlement programs that are very important programs. I think sometimes when people say entitlement programs, it sounds like it's a negative. They're very important workers' comp, disability, very important programs. But the state is saying we've got thousands of people employed, but they're contractors and they're not paying into this. We need to get the money in there.
Autumn, yeah.
So, just going back to this, did you say that the company who filters the money, who collects the money and then hands it provides it to the one, is that the person who would normally be considered the hiring entity?
So I think it's so murky, I'm not sure. But I think that's the way the law under this bill is trying to look. It's trying to look at the technology, the companies that are saying, we're just a tech company facilitating a transaction between A and B. But we're really not. B or A isn't really our employee. They're just using our service, and B is using our service. And so we're not anything but a platform for them to both engage with. And I think the law is trying to say, no, you employ A. And so I think that's how it's going to be applied to all gig economy companies, whether it be Upwork, whether it be Lyft, whether it be Postmates, whether it be any type of company that positions itself as a technology platform and not a human resources business. And so that's the entity that they're targeting as the employer.
So what about then Apple Music and Google Music? And
when they pay out all the artists,
when you as a put your stuff there. So I mean, does that make them your employer?
Well, but you're technically
really good
not providing any services to them. Okay, so this is you have to be providing services there. You're licensing content, so it's different. So that's a license. That's a totally because you're not providing services. There's a difference between content and services. But again, this is what happens when we write laws, right? And we all are involved in the entertainment in some way, and so we have to deal with copyright laws. I make a living interpreting music copyright laws because they're so convoluted. And copyright recognized, well, it is an important fundamental concept to help protect works and correctly attribute rights and monetization for people that are creative. We made that up. It's not as simple as, all the laws that we have are made up, right? But some stuff's really simple. You murder somebody, you can't do it. But even murder has so many nuances. Did you mean to murder? Did you accidentally? Did you do it because you were, right? Same thing with everything that we as a collective human species have made up to try to govern us. There's all kinds of things that as we go on in time, don't fit anymore. You know, and we see this all the time in music, like the way that money is handled, and it's antiquated. It's based on an old system that doesn't work, right? For anybody who's an independent, songwriter and signed up with ASCAP or BMI, and like the publishing designee, why 100% of what? Writer share, publisher share. What are we talking about, right? It's an old system that it tries to catch up, and the technology is always going to be faster than the money, which is always going to be faster than the law, and the law is always playing catch up with the other two. And unfortunately, by the time the law catches up, the technology has gone a totally different direction. I mean, we just spent 2 years getting the Music Modernization Act passed to handle digital streaming rights for mechanical royalties, but who knows if tomorrow all of a sudden we take a total left turn on the way we distribute content. We don't do streaming anymore. That's not the thing, and it's something else. And now all that work to get these things set up is meaningless because we don't do that anymore. So that's kind of the world that we live in, and that's just part of being in a society that is governed by laws, which I don't think anybody would say we don't want to have any law. I mean, nobody wants anarchy, but like when you have laws, there's things that happen that get weird, and so you can go down the rabbit hole on all this stuff, and like at some point you just end up banging your head against the wall, right? Because you think about like little things like, if creating content, is that the same as providing a service? And if it is, so yeah, I feel you, but the general consensus here is that really what this is targeted at is companies that are trying to say that they don't hire people, that they just create technology. Yeah.
Great. Wow, this is so important and really informative. And I wanted to just ask, by a show of hands, how many people are registered businesses as in the music business?
Yeah, set up a corporation or an LLC.
Do you have a corporation or an LLC?
Yeah.
Do you have a corporation?
I'm with a band that has an LLC.
You're with a band that has an LLC. Okay, so you're, who?
My situation is a little different because I set up a corporation in order to do a 501c3, which I've not gotten that status. But the question that I had is, and I realize that this is a little premature because based on what you're saying, it may end up being moot. But is there? Do you foresee that there could be a new paradigm where we have collectives or nonprofit entities that form collectives for musicians, for writers, for photographers, for all of these would that be helpful in any way?
I think that I've heard that argument made, and I think as time goes on and we as the way the economy works, especially in states like California, where we kind of are a little bit more progressive thinking, that we're going to see things like that enacted as a response to being targeted by, inadvertently or advertently by a law like this, that people are going to proactively now start thinking about, okay, what are ways that we can circumvent ever being caught up in this? And like it's almost akin to like having a mini union, right?
Okay, exactly.
Yeah. And so
like
I think
a regional thing.
Like a regional thing. Yeah. And so I think that's reasonable to think that might shake out and go that direction. There's obviously a nuance to it and figuring out exactly how you would set it up and how it would be monetized and how it would handle the money issue and collection and all that. So I think there's some issues there. But as far as being like an organization that would hire everyone out and stand in the place of the business, I think that those type of ideas would naturally spring from something like having to deal with this, and maybe this one gets knocked down and then they reintroduce something else, right? And who wants to sit here and have to like every couple of years or every year bang your head against the wall when something new comes in that's affecting people and causing this much grief? When that article from Ari came out, like literally every one of my clients freaked out, like lost their minds. Can we talk? And it's like, calm down, like it's gonna be okay. We're all going to be okay, but like you don't want to have to go through that. You don't want to think that like you're going to have to give up your dream because somebody won't be able to hire you to come play their venue because they can't give you because they can't afford to put you on payroll, and so now there's going to be no music venue. Like when that stuff starts coming up and like this is what you want to do for a living and like or this is what you're doing for a living, like it's scary. And so I totally get it, and but I think that there's also like a step back and recognize that these things have to go through cycles, and the fact that we're not alone in music. This is affecting lots and lots of people that do lots and lots of different things as contractors in the state, and so the likelihood that the law stays the way it is very slim. But again, I think that the intent here and the point here is not us. The intent and the point here was tech companies and saying, wait a minute, slow down, recognize that you are something other than what you say you are, and you need to, if you're going to be joining this marketplace, recognize that that's not a model that the state is going to stand behind. Because if you can see, there's lots of different ways and places where you can implement that. We're just a tech platform model in lots of different parts of society. And at some point, that could become a problem for the state or the federal government, because it eliminates a huge chunk of tax base, and it also puts it in a position where people are not, aren't paying into Social Security. So now you've got people that have like no pension at all, or money coming in when they get older. They haven't paid into any of the systems, and now what do we do? So I get that. So recognize that these concepts and these ideas fundamentally are probably not terrible, but the implementation is problematic sometimes, as it is here.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? I kind of have a question again. So some of you are already registered at the corporate level, and then there's some of us who may be sole proprietors or maybe unregistered. So, who here is registered as a sole proprietor, as an artist, or as a musician, or is operating under the books? Nobody. This is off the record.
Well, I've done a little off the books, but I had 19 1099s last year, so
that's not off the books.
So technically,
you're on the books.
If I can get some cash, I will, but it's not happening these days.
Yeah.
Wow, that's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All on the books.
So being registered as a DBA, which would be a sole proprietor doing business as either your artist name or a fictitious business name that you would come up with. Is that enough to be considered a business entity?
No, it is not. The only thing that would be considered a business entity and which would fit under that Borrello test is a corporation or an LLC. Yeah. General partnership, no. Even if you have a partnership agreement, sole proprietor, no. Setting up a DBA and getting a separate EIN, no. You literally have to set up, because essentially, and we hear this about corporations. Because a corporation or an LLC is considered a living, breathing entity, a person in and of itself. So that's the difference. Is that's the person you're hiring. You're not if I set up an LLC or LLP as a lawyer, you're hiring that. You're not hiring me.
Right.
So even if I set up a DBA or a sole proprietorship under a separate EIN, you're still hiring me.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the nuance in the law there, and then from there it's because there's a whole set of laws that govern corporations and LLCs. A whole different set of rules that have to be followed. Much like as a lawyer, I have to follow the rules of the bar on ethics and things like that. There's a whole set of rules, and a lot of them were changed under Enron. So the way that money can be handled, the way that you stand as a fiduciary to people that you work with, and a lot of those issues are specific laws that are applicable to corporations and LLCs that wouldn't be applicable to the sole proprietorship. So that's another reason why they're treated differently.
All right, any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Mark, so much for coming to speak with us.
Absolutely.
Really helpful. Thank you, Malaku, for opening your space. Super dope.
Thank you.
We're going to have another meeting. We're working on having these once a month, first Sundays, so we'll post in the group about the next meeting. And
Probably don't want to do it on the first Sunday of February.
because that sounds... Oh, Super Bowl. Thanks for the heads up. So we'll figure that out. We'll figure out a date.
How many of that will affect us?
Actually, that's true. We can have an anti-Super Bowl party. Like a super.
No, I'm sorry. I'm
Can't get a gig that day.
Nice.
A different type of Super Bowl.
Organizing this.
Oh,
I just
sure.
want to say thanks.
Yeah, thanks for organizing
Yeah.
that.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. That's what I do. I do want to say that anybody who has an interest in like learning about different things in the industry, you know, we have a lot of resources here between, you know, some of us have experienced touring internationally for 14 years, and some other people who aren't here today have done workshops on how to book yourself, like 100 local gigs, and I have a lot of background in social media, so it would be nice to know what you guys want to learn so we can focus our meetups around those things, skill sharing. That's something that I love to do, and so you know, you could just tell me, you know, oh, I really want to learn about this or that, or yeah, that would be cool, and then we'll start to do our meetings based around what people are really interested in, because I could just throw stuff out there all the time, but it'd be nice to know that it's really going to help you. The other thing too is that I just launched my company, which is it's a tech startup, and you know, I've got a lot of, you know, interesting things with this law coming in that, you know, it makes me think about, should my tech startup be focused on helping California musicians get themselves registered? That's a whole other story, and it just opens up a lot of questions. But if anybody needs an EPK, which is an electronic press kit, that you can use for free. It's a free tool. It's super streamlined, and we just launched it. Yeah. Courtney's band has one. Rarefaction. It's free. It's at musiciansbase.com, which is spelled BASS. So I'll just write that here. Yes, that's a little bit of shameless self-promotion, but the point is that it's a free tool that can really help you get your online presence focused. So, and feel free to share that with other musicians who might need it. But so thank you guys. There's some sodas there if you're thirsty. It's a beautiful day. Feel free to hang out, talk amongst yourselves. We're gonna be here for a few more minutes just to wrap up. So feel free to chill. Thank you guys again for coming out. Yeah.
I'll say a couple things.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, just I guess first thing on my mind is there's some songwriters here. Would you guys be interested in having a songwriter circle, like a feedback type session here, like in the studio? If it's nice here, but otherwise in the studio, and if it's something acoustic or recorded or whatever, because I think it'd be cool to have like feedback. Or how many of you guys would be interested?
We used to do that. I haven't done it in a little bit, but we talked about this before.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're really helpful, and it's nice to get a little circle. The way that we did it was just basically kind of a potluck dinner, and then had everybody go around and bring things that were not fully formed or that you couldn't take feedback on, that you were going to be offended, you know, like bring something that you like want or interested in people's feedback in. Yeah.
Digital used to do something like that. They called it Producer Social.
Yeah, I'd been to a couple of those.
Yeah.
But this is more songwriters. Yeah. But it can be both, really. That was a lot of like beats type things. I think songs are more
very much beats.
Yeah. So I was thinking maybe like a Wednesday night. Does that work for most people?
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, but maybe.
What time-ish?
Yeah, I mean,
evening is after 7.
Yeah, 7 maybe. I mean, 7's a little bit late. I think maybe 6 is. But 6 is also close to work time, so. Maybe like.
We used to do 6:30.
6:30 might be good. So I mean, would you guys want to do one this Wednesday? Okay, I'll set up an event for 6:30 on Wednesday.
Nice, thank you.
And then the other thing I'll say is, if you guys want to come inside, I can play some recent tracks of clients, mine, just so you can sort of hear what's being created. So yeah, I'll be heading in there in a couple minutes.
And
And then
we are required to take a selfie for Stefan.
Oh, yeah, can we take a group photo? And
Yeah, let's definitely take
Can I ask one last question before we break? I noticed. Did you film this whole thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
And is there access to that? Because I know Tom Miller was interested also. in
Oh,
this.
right on.
Yeah.
Still
Make it
filming.
available to you. We're filming right now.
Great.
Low battery.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Yeah, we'll get this
We'll
up
figure out how
somewhere.
it'll be up.
It'll be up somewhere. See?